If you want to help Myth Vision Podcast grow, you can join our Patreon. There are different tiers, as well as help out with PayPal. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Sheriff Fathi, I think maybe it's Fathi, I don't know, but it's Fathi from YouTube comments a question. I've been screaming questions for 3 months now. Salutes, Derek. I know it's quite strange to have a Muslim audience, but you do, buddy. Please, can you ask Dr. Price if there was any record or even a single mention for a daughter of a Jewish high priest with a virgin birth tell or not?
Do you mean, is that part of the Mary business?
I would think he's getting on that, but he says, Dr. Price, if there was any record or even a single mention for a daughter of a Jewish high priest with a virgin birth tell. What's there one?
I don't know of such a story told about someone other than Mary. Excuse me. And I do know that the nativity story of Mary had her as a functionary of the temple, that she was with other girls who, I think, sewed vestments for the priests or the various cloths and stuff used in the temple. But and then Mary becomes impregnated by the Holy Spirit, and she is accused of having violated her vows and all of that. But, of course, in the Christian story, she hasn't. In the Toledot Yeshu, the generations of Jesus, a Jewish anti-gospel, which is surprisingly neutral toward Jesus in a number of respects, not what you'd expect. There's some nasty stuff in there, but for instance, with Mary, so Mary was a righteous woman who was not exactly seduced by this Roman soldier Pandera, but it was like a mistaken identity thing like you'd find in a Victorian novel. He deceived her into thinking this was Joseph coming by late one night. Oh, Joseph, what are you doing here? Well, and so he impregnates her, but no aspersion is cast on her. Interestingly, later on, some Jewish polemicists equated Mary the Virgin, so-called, with Mary Magdalene, which they derived from Hebrew or Aramaic word meaning hairdresser, implying a madam of a brothel. And I think that's probably the original denotation of it, actually. Hence the story of Mary as a prostitute. Well, now feminists say, oh, it doesn't ever actually say she was a prostitute. Well, I think if you're really a feminist, you don't necessarily think that if she was a prostitute, that was even a bad thing. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, it's sort of outside the honor and shame dialectic. So if you take Mary, the mother of Jesus, to be Mary the prostitute, and there is that version, you find it in the Life of Brian, for instance. They have it, but where it's actually presented as the daughter of a high priest having a virginal conception, I don't know of anything like that. Reverend Moon thought that Jesus was the son of the priest Zacharias, so he was the half-brother to John the Baptist. And because Reverend Moon had this great midrashic imagination. It's like when I come up with these crazy theories about the Silas was James the Just, it's as if I said, oh, well, I wouldn't have had that imagination if it wasn't for God revealing it to me. That's kind of what Reverend Moon would do, and sometimes they're really fascinating things. In fact, I wrote a Mooney gospel based on various insights of his into the Jesus story. Well, I don't know of one about that. but there are aspects of the Mary story that have parallels in classical mythology, but I'm not sure if any of them have anything to do with a virgin birth. If I'm not catching the drift of your question, please ask another one and clarify. But from what I think you mean, I don't believe there is one.
Yeah, just in case, I'll phrase it this way to make it simplified. I think he's just saying, are there any other virgins who give birth, like a virgin birth, narratives for any Jewish women ever, other than Mary? That might be an easier way to answer, because I don't think there would be, but I don't know. I don't know sources. Are there any? Of course, we have miraculous births from people who couldn't conceive, even though they were with their man. We're talking virgins that never had children, that conceived of child. Is there any other Jewish
Not
sources?
that I know of. There were a few others in other religions.
Right.
And so it's often thought, and it makes sense to say, that Christians borrowed that on what Debelius called the law of biographical analogy, that you regard the birth of your founder, hero, saint, whatever, as so earth-shaking that he must have really come from outside the ordinary human lot. And so that I think Romulus was supposed to be his mother, Rhea Silvia, was impregnated by Ares or Mars. And there are other ones like Alexander the Great and Plato. Both were supposed to be demigods because their mothers were impregnated by gods, but they were both married women. So even though their husband had nothing to do with it, they were impregnated by superhuman forces. But if you want to know if there was specifically a Jewish virgin birth narrative, other than this, I don't know of one.
Let me ask one more before we exit this question. I think this is interesting, because it's either virgin birth or you have an interesting explanation that I've heard people trying to make it more Jewish, so to speak. It wasn't a virgin birth like you would see in pagan religions. No, it just meant a young woman, and she has a baby. Does the notion of a virgin birth, is that what it's saying, Dr. Price?
I doubt it, but that is based on ancient Jewish usage, so it is conceivable, no pun intended. But that's a great example of rationalistic exegesis, where you're trying to save the appearances, as they say, but explain them differently. And in this case, it would be like saying somebody has misconstrued what it meant. Like when people said, when Jesus is called the Son of Man, that's to emphasize his humanity as opposed to the Son of God, and he's got the two natures. That's not what it originally meant. I mean, if you want to redefine it and use it that way poetically, what the heck, nobody's got the copyright on it, but that doesn't appear to have been the point. And so it could be like that. It might, I believe Barbara Thiering perhaps says that in Qumran they may have used that terminology to mean that, and there sure was a differential in age between a lot of husbands and wives in the ancient world. Like I mentioned the other day, my mother, who was born in, I think, 1917 and lived in rural Tennessee and Mississippi, she said that she knew it was fairly common for girls to marry at 12 years old. Nobody thought it was child molesting or anything. That's just the way it was in these rural areas. And just like, so when Jerry Lee Lewis married a 12-year-old, everybody was shocked. Well, they didn't know the cultural context. He wasn't molesting children. It's just, I mean, we kind of find it yucky today, but that's really a different matter. Like, we kind of feel a little uncomfortable with the idea of polygamy, but that's an ancient, venerable arrangement. And so the same sort of deal there. There is a fascinating book on this by Jane Shaberg called The Illegitimacy of Jesus, where she argues quite effectively that Matthew does not mean to say Jesus was miraculously conceived, that based on the similarity, well, based on the precedents set in Matthew's genealogy of 4 sexually dubious women from the Bible, and now nonetheless they were part of the providential history of salvation. Bathsheba, Tamar, Rahab, and what's the other one? I can't think. And that Ruth, did I say her?
Not sure.
where you might have sneered at it, but what do you know? God is able to work even with this. She says there are reasons to think that Matthew means, well, yeah, Jesus was born illegitimately, that Joseph was not his father, but this wouldn't be the first time God worked through that. God is not so snooty as to despise sinners and not to be able to work with them.
Wow.
She tries to make a similar case for Luke. I think that one fails, though there is an alternate argument where you can easily say, no, Luke doesn't mean that there was a miraculous conception either. And I don't explain the whole darn thing, but that is quite fascinating. And I still am undecided on that, but I take that quite seriously.
And let me ask you this, closing out, since our friend is a Muslim, does the Quran only permit it to be virgin birth? Is that how they interpret it, based on is their lens kind of filtered through the church's idea of what Jesus' birth is, or does the Quran permit it to just be what you just described here?
No, there are 2 versions of, it seems like Luke's nativity in the Quran. I mean, parallels there, pretty much the same thing in different surahs. And it's very clear that she was miraculously impregnated by the Spirit of God. The problem is they wouldn't say Jesus, therefore, was the Son of God, because they're not Trinitarians.
Right.
And I think that it's possible one of those passages does mean that Jesus was pre-existent as the Logos, because there was this early Islamic flirtation with Christian doctrine. It took a while for them to sort of bounce around between Judaism and Samaritanism and Christianity to come up with what they believed. But it's very clear. I remember once I could just have screamed. This New Testament professor, whom I have great respect for, somebody asked him in a seminary classroom, a guy that wanted to become a missionary to Muslims when he graduated. A bad idea. But at any rate, he said, how do you explain the virgin birth to Muslims? That shouldn't be too tough. They believe in the virgin birth. I thought, how do you not know this? If you're interested in Islam and Christianity, they don't have any problem with that at all. It's just the question of the Trinity. Does that make Jesus the Son of God? No, it doesn't. But he was the virgin-born Messiah who was sinless. He was greater than Muhammad as the Messiah. He never sinned, and so on and so forth. They hold Jesus in extremely high esteem. But they say, of course, Christians are wrong on many things. He was never crucified. God answered his prayer for deliverance. He was taken up to heaven, and so forth. And he's going to come back one day and kick the butts of the idolaters and so on. It's sort of half of what Christians say, but there's no criticism of Jesus. Quite interesting.